research, engaging with questions of indigeneity, food, and futurity. Her work uses a mix of writing, cooking, and participatory artworks that advocate for food sovereignty. So we're keeping on this thread of food and seeds and plants. Among other projects, Beatriz is one half of the Food Commons, a platform that seeks to challenge alimentary cultural narratives in Mexico. So over to you, Beatriz.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I am delighted to be here with you. And thank you, Diego and Silvia, for the invitation. I am here to present the story of my long-term project, a participatory art series, Ancestral Quelites, Anarchist Quelites. It began in 2018 with an invitation from the Canadian independent curator, Suying Lee, to take part in Alimentary, her curatorial series in which artists reflect on the wisdom embodied between the tongue and the gut. Suying asked me if I consider myself indigenous. I had lost the link to indigenous pathways and territory when my grandparents left their ancestral homes. So obviously I said no, although my face and complexion tell a different story. She responded, then capitalism is winning because that is exactly what it wants you to believe, that you cease to recognize yourself as a person who is heir to an ancestral culture. I have come to understand that staying healthy through culturally appropriate foods, staying alive, and acknowledging myself as a descendant of indigenous peoples constitutes my first act of resistance to colonial capitalism. First, I plan to speak about the milpa, a Mesoamerican polycultural system for amplifying biodiversity, inseparable from the social fabric that sustains community-based ways of being and world-making. The milpa emerged from a confluence of synergies beyond the human, for example, edible wild greens that in central Mexico we refer to as quelites. I shifted my focus and made the quelites the axis of the conversations that will take place in various galleries across Toronto. From mid-2018 onwards, I visited milpas in damp, ashen, urban soils along Puebla, the state of Mexico, and Mexico City. Then the pandemic struck. That did not stop me from sending a pasote via DHL to the Art Gallery of Burlington in Toronto and filling it with a smell akin to that of marijuana. In indigenous language, Nahuatl, a pasote means skunk herb. Masked and all, people went there to collect their little epazote bags. Then I gave an online talk and cooking session to the people, or so the people could learn about quelites, their history, taste, and nutritional properties. As you can see in the title, I had not yet critically reflected on the inherent speciesist colonialism hidden in the concept of superfoods, nor on the self-exotizing essentialism of calling quelites indigenous, when edible wild greens, despite being constitutive or of Amerindian, territorial, and gastronomic histories, precede even the formation of nation-states. Moreover, they currently transcend the category of indigenous, as quelites are essential for working class communities, for migrants, and for those facing financial precarity. So here you can read my first milestone regarding how to make fissures in dominant narratives and keep a critical approach against normalization of language in our own practice and work. At the beginning of 2021, I received support from the Institute for Anarchist Studies in the United States to produce artwork related to indigenous anarchism. Thank you, IAS, because your support during such a difficult year enabled me to it. Over the following 3 years, I dedicated myself to reflecting on how, through the extractive violence against indigenous land and female indigenous bodies in the region comprising Mexico, Canada, and the United States, all genocidal practices of colonialism are reenacted by interrupting the continuity of cultures, both in terms of the right to be born indigenous and to be nourished by native produce. However, during the pandemic lockdown, although I felt emotionally connected to the issue, I was not part, or it was not part of my daily reality, and actually it prevented me from healing my own wounds. What was present in my everyday life, constantly helping me to heal, sustaining my body, and regulating my nervous system throughout the lockdown, were the quelites and fermented foods. So my milestone number 2 is that departing from the web of essentialism requires working with what is immediate, proximate, and one's own. Between 2021 and 2022, my friend Zoe Hine-Jones invited me to create phytograms with epazote and plant-based photographic emulsions on 16mm film. We began a collaborative project entitled Dupla Molcajete to acknowledge several forms of violence that endanger edible insects in South Mexico. In 2023, Zoe organized the Visualizing Food Waste Field School program, which took place in Milpalta and Xochimilco, centers of agricultural resistance in Mexico. There, I first introduced the concept of anarchist quelites. I had spent a year tracing symbolic relationships between the botanical behavior of edible and medicinal weeds and forms of social organizations such as mutual aid, solidarity, autonomy, transporterism, voluntary association, self-defense, and cooperation. Although these practices are not exclusive to anarchism, they are central to it. Moreover, this conceptual framing emerged from a desire to acknowledge the historical importance of anarchism within the agrarian and peasant movements of 19th and 20th century Mexico. Cocina Colaboratorio became interested in my research and invited me to present it at an encounter titled Quelites as Metaphors of Resistance. We gathered to cook with the anthropologist and traditional cook Nora Estrada in the Chinampa territory of Xochimilco, a lucky shrine zone that is also my ancestral home through my paternal lineage. We reflected on the political, social, economic, cultural, and gastronomic dimension of quelites. I situated quelites within the dimension of deep indigenous time to trace their link to the past and to prefigurative politics, to project that link into the future without means or ends, but rather as pure action oriented toward what we wish to create, as though it were already becoming. As the daughter of an ancestral territory that does not claim me, working on it alongside the local communities who are still rooted there requires me to respect and relearn situated knowledge through non-extractive practices and methods. So we reached the milestone number 3, that faced with dispossession and epistemic erasure, we need to learn situated eco-pedagogies, free from appropriation, but also free from local chauvinism. We must practice justice healing and collectively reflect on the presence of outsiders in ancestral territories and on our ways of being together. If we all eat what is grown there, and if we are asked to walk along campesinos or peasants and step out of urban individualism, how can we do so in the most respectful coexistence and managing our privileges from both sides and for the benefit of all of us? How do we learn to sow freedom and respect in territories contested under colonial capitalist oppression, where we often find a lot of resentment? Almost inevitably, deep time and prefigurative politics led me to the ontological turn that I approach through the Amazonian philosophies of the ancestral future and of multinaturalism. At this point, I was already stammering a different language with the quelites, who no longer appeared to me as merely food, but as something constitutive of my life and of the lives of those who became me before me. Thus, I began to increase my external intimacy, which shaped as collective building of offerings based on quelites for the Mexican tradition Dia de Muertos, Day of the Dead. my way to reintegrate through a key tradition the idea of plants as persons and ancestors. The first one took place in Xochimilco, supported by Cocina Colaboratoria in 2023. In a collective ritual, I summoned the presence of our deceased human and non-human beloved ones. I called out loud each and every one of their names while handling a printed photograph to their family member, who placed it upon wreaths of wood, a symbol of our belonging and reintegration into the ecosystem. In 2024, my beloved German friend Janina Totzauer and I organized a public program at the Goethe Institute in Mexico City that included a group exhibition, a Quelite altar for Dia de Muertos, and a participatory art exercise. The group exhibition featured the generous participation of 16 artists from 6 countries and 3 continents. Their works, printed on fabric and stitched together in a quilt that formed 3 vertical banners descending from ceiling to floor, were connected by stories of love, drawn by memory, reflecting on grief, loss, death, and rebirth. The offering included The Ancestor of the Future, a wire sculpture in the shape of a baby commissioned from the artist Rosa Arismendi and later covered in Quelites by myself. I conceived of this piece as a strategy to stimulate multinaturalist imagination and to view Quelites, despite the lame anthropocentrism I employed, as beings radically closer to us. Respectfully, Quelites were composted in the streets surrounding the Goethe Institute. The artist, activist, and bioremediator Leto Delgado, known as Quelite de Ciudad, is one of my dearest allies. Leto leads walks to identify the wide variety of edible and medicinal plants in the urban context. I began, just give me a second. Thank you. I began to create the imaginative pacts that became a co-authored work of expanded literature by all participants. At the beginning of each walk, I call to playfully appropriate a shared narrative. We are researchers from the future, scavengers here to study the current human relationship with the edible plants. Or we are composting the underworld, as in the case of this video. Organized as small anarchist-like squads, we tackle specific tasks: written, visual, and audio documentation, deactivation of death technologies, the name I give to waste collection, and poetic games to rename plants. In this way, documentation and solidarity-based cleaning with plants form part of a non-hierarchical collective order. Throughout the walk, Leto teaches us about the plants, and we do not extract their aesthetics, we document them as part of our learning processes, and we collaborate with their environments. At the end, we eat them together. My friend Nathanael Guzman under Project Masa has been another cherished ally, having cooked Quelites for us on several occasions. But in the case of this video, the meal was prepared by gastronomist Andrea Aquino. This is what I have called archaeothnobotanical drifts of biocultural recognition. We walk outside the logics of urban productivity. We learn and play together, engaging to speculative futures. We eat Quelites to entangle with them from the gut. And we reach the milestone number 4. Within the collective dimension, molecular synergies transform meaning and allow us to reflect on the fact that extractivism is not only about pipelines and mining, but also how the system extracts our vital space, time, and nutrition on our daily lives. So we are trying to make an aesthetic that is not cosmetic, but that collectivizes practices for life liberation. I would like to acknowledge feasts and the spirit of celebration as inherent to solidarity with Quelites. You have here some images with Masa, with my friend Dalila Estrella and our project, The Food Commons, and a book presentation for anarchist autonomy movements in Latin America. And in all of them, public conversations and eating Quelites are part of festive conviviality. Finally, the loop that began during the pandemic through the support from the Institute for Anarchy Studies is now materializing in a series of collaborative works with Los Solidarios de la Voz de la Mate, 6 indigenous Tzotzil peasants prisoners in El Cerezo number 5, El Cerezo de la Mate, which is a prison in San Cristobal de las Casas, Chiapas. During a solidarity visit, a diverse group of activists met with them in August 2024. They received us with fruit, bread, flavored waters, and shared their life stories. They have been held for almost 2 decades. Since then, I have maintained a correspondence in which I ask them questions about their personhood and stories, because judicial processes affecting incarcerated individuals often strip them of their identity, reducing them to a crime, a sentence, or a case number. But I want to know what they remember of their territory, what they dream of, what they like. They undertook a 27-day hunger strike during the COVID pandemic, established an anarchist occupy inside the prison, and have taken part in protests. They appropriated 3 small plots of land and turned them into vegetables gardens, where they grow edible and medicinal plants and beans. They have succeeded in receiving their rations from the prison managers directly and uncooked. This allows them to cook in the traditional way, to heal themselves, and to produce a small surplus for other prisoners. In their letters, they say that the only way to care for Mother Earth is by sowing it, that freedom is being able to plant a milpa and walk in the mountains, and that the sweetness of life comes from fruits. I document everything and clean the digital versions of their drawings. I use my imagination to recreate a series of biocultural, symbolic, and spatial relationships as I imagine, and then translate them into collage art. These are the first artworks I have created and were exhibited in a local emergent gallery called Chroma. I am currently working with my friend Juan Manuel Coronel on the production of an animation that will tell the story of Los Solidarios de la Voz de la Mate. This animation is due to be completed by the end of 2025, and additional collaborators are gradually joining the project. The final milestone is about donating our time, giving the best of us to safeguard collective waste, food waste, territorial waste, to preserve foodscapes, and also to exert solidarity with people from vulnerable communities, historically displaced and oppressed, because in my personal case, thinking in general terms led me to live the everyday more consciously. And once connected to the depth political and the political being of wild edible greens, I was pushed to find a real proximity to people in distant contexts, people who struggle for land and food sovereignty, that intersects with the major challenges of ecological politics and planetary social crisis. And therefore, I became whole with this small stretch of land that I inhabit and which in turn inhabits me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bea, for that vibrant and exciting intervention.